Here they are, golden brown loaves of bread with a thin, slightly crispy crust and a soft, fluffy and beautifully risen interior. The great thing is that this recipe isn't too complicated. You don't need to knead the dough excessively, yet it still produces excellent results. If you also enjoy the feeling of baking a batch of fresh hot bread at home, then let's make some today. First, I prepare 300 milliliters of water. The water will be the medium to activate the yeast, helping it to start working and produce gas during the dough fermentation process. Next, add 3 grams of dry yeast. Yeast is what helps the dough rise. When it comes into contact with water and is given enough time, the yeast becomes active, producing carbon dioxide gas, which then forms air pockets in the bread. Add 1 teaspoon of sugar. The sugar here isn't just for flavor. It also provides the yeast with initial nutrients to activate more quickly. Just a small amount is enough to make the yeast work more effectively. I gently stir to dissolve the yeast and sugar into the water. From this very first step, the foundation of a delicious loaf of bread begins to be formed. Now, let's prepare 450 grams of flour. Flour is the main structural component of the cake. When combined with water, the protein in the flour gradually forms gluten. And gluten is the network that traps air, allowing the cake to rise and become fluffy. I just mix everything together. No need to knead yet. At this stage, the goal is for the flour to absorb enough water. When the flour is well hydrated, the gluten will have time to gradually form itself, saving me a lot of effort in kneading. This is also why this recipe is quite accessible to beginners in bread making. The dough might look a bit rough and sticky at this point, but don't worry, you'll see it change significantly as you work with it. I covered it tightly and let the dough rest for 30 minutes. This time is very important, as the dough will continue to absorb water, becoming softer, pliable, and beginning to develop its natural elastic structure. After 30 minutes, I wet my hands, stretched the 4 edges of the dough, and folded them towards the center. This helps rearrange the gluten network, making the dough firmer and better able to retain air. Simply put, this is a way to increase the strength of the dough without kneading it too vigorously. Just one fold and the dough looks completely different, softer but also much more firm. I continued to cover the dough and let it rest for another 30 minutes. Alternating between folding and unfolding the dough like this helps the yeast develop evenly, while the dough structure becomes increasingly firm and stable. After the second rest, I repeated the stretching and folding process one more time. This time you'll see the dough is more elastic and the surface is noticeably smoother. That's a sign that the gluten is forming quite well. If you're making bread for the first time, this step will be very interesting as the dough begins to come alive. Next, I covered the dough and let it rise for 2 hours. This is the stage where the yeast becomes more active, producing gas, causing the dough to rise and accumulate flavor. After the dough has risen, I sprinkle a layer of dry flour on the table to prevent sticking. I gently pour the dough out. At this point, I needed to handle it relatively gently so as not to lose too much of the air that had accumulated in the dough. Knead the dough thoroughly for 5 to 7 minutes. This helps the gluten in the flour achieve the best possible structure. At this stage, you will no longer see the dough sticking to your hands or sagging because the gluten layers are in perfect condition. I shaped the dough, then divided it into equal portions. Dividing it evenly from the start will help the cakes cook more evenly, and the finished product will look more appealing and professional. Each portion of dough will be rolled into a ball and folded on the bottom. This step helps create surface tension for the dough ball. When the dough surface has good tension, the bread will hold its shape better during rising and baking. I placed each shaped portion of dough onto the baking tray. At this point, the cookies had already started to take on a very clear shape. I let the dough rise for another 10 minutes before scoring the surface. This is the final resting time to help the dough recover slightly after shaping, so that the bread will rise better when baked in the oven. Next, I used a knife to make a few cuts on the surface of the cake. These cuts not only make the cake look nicer, but also allow the internal pressure to escape as the cake rises rapidly in the oven. This helps the cake to expand in the right direction, preventing accidental cracks. Now, bake the cake at 230 degrees Celsius for about 20 minutes. The high temperature will help the cake rise rapidly in the initial stage, often called the oven spring, which is the final burst of growth in the oven. After that, the surface begins to brown due to a color-forming reaction, making the crust more fragrant, appealing, and giving it a very distinctive baked aroma. And here is the final product. The loaves of bread rise evenly, the surface puffs up beautifully, the crust is golden brown and looks very fragrant. When held, the crust is just the right amount of dry, while the inside is soft, fluffy and light. The recipe isn't overly complicated, but understanding each step correctly will make a huge difference to the final product. From activating the yeast, letting the dough rest, folding the dough to create structure, to scoring the surface and keeping it moist before baking, each step contributes to creating a delicious and visually appealing loaf of bread. If you enjoy recipes like this, please continue following me in future videos. And if you ever get the chance to try making it, please let me know what your finished product looks like. Thank you for watching the video.